I've asked this gentleman to come and speak to us. He's like a brother to me. I thought about things to say, and I thought, you know what, everybody's probably heard half of it, but we've done a lot of things together. I did think of something on the way up here as I was riding by myself. I've known this guy twice as long as I've known my wife. And, and I thought, I don't know my earliest memory of him, but it had to be 3 or 4, because we've been playing sports together our whole lives. And I've known his wife a lot longer than I've known my wife as well, because they were high school sweethearts and been married 20 plus years now and have 2 wonderful kids. So a little bit about just about Billy in general. He's always been there for me. He's a true friend. He's one of those guys that, talking to my sponsor Jeff or Matt or Roy or whoever it may be, he's one of my spiritual mentors. I can always count on him shooting it straight. He's got a knack about kind of evaluating what I have to say, cutting through all the crap and just getting to the facts. And, he and his wife both live this way of life. It's, it's not a chore, it's not an activity, it's a way of life for these guys. And it shows in their life, and it shows in the people that they touch. So I won't take any more of his time, but if you guys would help me welcome Billy B. from Nashville, Swanee.
Hello, I'm Billy Best, and I'm an alcoholic. If y'all would, bow your heads with me. I'm going to say a quick prayer before I get started. Father God, thank you for giving me the opportunity to be here tonight with your children. I pray that you open our hearts and open our minds, that we all may walk away with something tonight that help us be more beneficial to you, especially me. I ask that you guide me and use me as an instrument of your will, that whatever come out of my mouth may come out in a loving and tolerant way. May your will be done. Amen. I shared my story a few times and done a few workshops, and I heard a man open up with a prayer like that one time. It was one of the most meaningful talks I ever had, and so I had ever heard. And so I decided to start trying that. I used to worry, all the time about when I was going to share something. What am I going to say? Do I need to write notes and all that stuff? And and it seemed like that I'd get done and walk away just feeling like that was horrible, And so I started using that little prayer before I started sharing, and what I started noticing, like Sister Kathy mentioned earlier, was afterwards people walk up and start telling me things they really enjoyed that I had to share, and I have no idea where it come from. I'm like, did I really say that? And again, like Sister Kathy, half the time I don't even agree with it. But before the conversation usually ends, I'm trying to explain why I even said something like that. And so usually what happens with me, guys, without sounding a little hokey pokey, is at some point in time, God's going to take this thing over up here. If you listen to Billy, you're probably going to get really bored. But I promise you, it won't take long for the Spirit's going to come in here, and God is going to start using me as he sees fit. And somebody here tonight, if it's just one person, like I said, it may just be me that'll walk away and something will come out of my mouth that I need to hear. And so I'm grateful that I've been around these rooms long enough to allow the miracle to happen in my life. It hasn't always been that pleasurable being sober. And I can say today that I honestly am not suffering from the effects of alcoholism. And that is a blessing in itself. My sobriety date is April the 28th of 1995. I celebrated 21 years, and coming up on 22, God willing, I'll make it. And I say that not braggingly. I say that because as you hear me talk and tell my story, you'll look up, and if you're new to the program, and you'll be like, well, if that guy can stay sober that long. Because in 21 years, I'm still fumbling through this thing. I still have a lot to learn. It always seems like when I get to a arrival point, that's usually the times in my sobriety where I have taken the largest falls. And I have to relearn all over again. And so I try to remain in a place now with my sobriety where I won't say that I don't know anything, but I don't really know a whole lot of much of anything, if that makes any sense. I don't really draw the line in the sand anymore. I just kind of let it be what it's supposed to be. I'll back up in one second and just simply say I'd like to thank the committee for having me here. That's it is an honor and a privilege, and I don't say that just because it's something cliche to say when you start speaking somewhere. But to be able to share your journey in recovery and for it to have possibly having an impact on someone else's life is a blessing. And a lot of people don't, I don't know that they ever really feel comfortable doing that. I certainly do feel comfortable with that, and it's not because that I'm any better than anyone in AA, but I can tell you I attribute that to good sponsorship. When I got sober, I think the people that helped me get sober were, man, they were spot on when it came to the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. I won't go into a whole lot of my story. You know, I'm an alcoholic. I drank. And probably most people in this room did the same thing, or you wouldn't be here. You know, I know people that's wrecked cars, gone to jail, you know, done lots of crazy things under the influence of alcohol. And so what got us here, to me, is irrelevant. We know we all have one thing in common, and that's the fact that we drank too much alcohol, and at some time we decided we wanted to quit and probably found that we couldn't. And we know other people that's been affected by it. If you're not the alcoholic, you're here supporting someone else. You know, those things to me today are irrelevant. Now, getting here was probably I like to think that when it happened that it was probably something to do with my own thinking, but looking back, it was probably an act of providence. I would have never thought 6 weeks, even probably 6 days before I came to my first AA meeting, that this was ever in my stars. I don't know how I ended up in AA. I can tell you the series of events that happened that led up to me walking into my first AA meeting, but it definitely was not of my plans. I was miserable, irritable, restless, and discontent, you know, as the book describes it, and I had gotten to a point in life where I had arrived pretty much. You know, I had some goals that I had set, and I had achieved all of them, and you know, life was running pretty smoothly till I got up and went to work one day, and it was almost like just something reached in and pulled all the happiness out. And you know, that feeling that some people talk about in these rooms of impending doom, it came over me. And I didn't know what it was, didn't know how to describe it. I just knew it was there. And it was almost that feeling of something bad's going to happen, you know, and nothing's really going on, but something bad's going to happen. And that went on for a couple of weeks, and I started, you know, good old alcoholic that I am, you know, you start thinking about it. And the more I thought, the worse it got. And the worse it got, the more I thought. So about 2 weeks into this thing, I decided that I need to get in better shape. Maybe I'm just not taking care of myself well enough. And so I went down and joined the fitness center, and I started going and buying some self-help books down at the local bookstore, and I cut back on my drinking, you know, and I go about a month, and I'm 30 days into this thing, and I'm not losing any weight, you know, and I talked to this guy, and I said, man, now I joined a fitness center that was really close to the place that I worked, and they had an indoor basketball court, an indoor tennis court, but they also had an indoor sports bar. And I couldn't understand why I wasn't losing weight. I mean, it was a cool place for me to join. I mean, it was, to me, the natural place to join. And I mean, I said, you know, I've been working out 30 days, I haven't lost any weight. And he said, well, you can't work out and then drink a case of beer every night, you know, it's just not going to work. So I decided I'd stop doing that. And I went for about 2 weeks, and during that 2-week period, that feeling of impending doom really intensified. And I started having night sweats, I couldn't sleep, I couldn't hold any food down. And so I was trying to really put my finger on it, and I had a guy that worked for me. And by the way, if I'm talking too fast, I'm also a recovering used car salesman. I had worked my way up to managing this automobile dealership, and I had a guy that worked for me that came back from the Gulf War. And for those of you that don't believe there is such thing as a Gulf War illness, I've witnessed it right in front of my eyes. This man that was perfectly healthy when he got back, within a 6-month period of time, was losing hair and losing teeth, and was perfectly healthy when he come back, but he got really sick in a short period of time. But you know, I had convinced myself, because I didn't really know what they had or how they had contracted it. So I convinced myself, whatever he brought back from Iraq, this guy had given it to me. I've got some type of mysterious illness that's come over me, you know, and it's making me feel this way. So I start going to the doctors. They look at my blood work and say, oh, everything looks fine. You're healthy. You're fine. I'm like, no, I'm not fine. You know, and I go to the self-help section of the bookstore, and by this time, the guy in the little self-help section knew me by first name. He's like, hello, Billy, what's it going to be today? I said, well, I've got manic depression and bipolar. I haven't brought any books, so, you know, how do you cure this about yourself? And I'd leave, you know, with a stack of books this tall, and I would always flip through those books, you know, during the day, and I would find a piece of myself in there. Yep, that's me. That's what my problem is, you know. And I would read a little bit of it, and I'd get down to the bottom part, and it would say, like, people that have this disorder used to have to be locked up in a mental hospital. And I'm like, well, I don't want this to be me. Maybe I just own this part of it. And the bad thing, what's funny about it now looking back is I had like 20 books, but I fit all of them. I mean, I literally fit all of them. I was a little bit of all the crazy, And the doctors couldn't find anything wrong with me, so I picked up the phone one day, and I'd opened up the book at work, just the phone book, just plopped it open. And an act of divine providence. Opened the book up, and there was a number that said, the Arbors of Brentwood. Didn't know what it was, I called it. And it was actually a treatment center in Brentwood, Tennessee. And they answered the phone, and the guy answered it, and he said, oh, my name is Joe, blah, blah, blah. And, I was like, hello, Joe, and I got to talking, and realized it was a guy that I actually played baseball with growing up. And he was a counselor there. And he's like, hey, tell me what's going on, Billy. We talked for a minute and caught up on old times, and I told him what was going on. I think I'm losing my mind. And so I go out there, and we talked for about 30 minutes. He asked me to fill out that little questionnaire. And I filled it out, and he looked at it for about 5 seconds, and he started laughing, and he pushed it back across the desk. And I said, what's so funny? Because I'm not laughing about anything at this point in my life. And he says, if I've ever seen a classic example of an alcoholic, he said, you're one of them. He said, tell you what I want you to do. He said, I want you to go to an AA meeting tonight. He said, when they get done with the meeting, the chairperson's going to say, has anybody heard anything they like? I'd like to try this way of life. He said, go up there and get you one of those desire chips and ask the chairperson, who is your sponsor, and when can you start working the steps? And I said, all right. So I go down, and I'm sitting across the street at the bank from this meeting house where it was, and I'm looking across the street at this home people are going in and out of, and I remember thinking to myself, they look like a crack house. And I'm looking at the people going in and out. Yeah, mind you that I had worked my way up to the general manager of an automobile dealership, so I'm driving a really nice car, wearing a suit and tie, and I'm looking at the people and I'm judging. I'm thinking, that guy can't help me. I don't know. That guy he shouldn't be out on the streets. And I had made up my mind, sitting in that parking lot 15 minutes before the meeting, I had decided that there was no one in there that could help me, and that I just need to go home, kiss my wife and kids, get up the next morning, drive down to the creek behind my house, and blow my brains out. And that was my plan. And I was serious about it. I had not told anyone, but that's what I wanted to do. Now, in the car business, we have some of you people, I'm going to give away their secrets, because I haven't done it in a long time. But, one of the things they used to do was, you'd be surprised how many people would just follow you. Just follow. So we would get people that would come in a lot looking at cars and would say, oh, we like to look at this. We're not really looking. We just want to, browse for a moment, then we're going to leave. Well, come on, follow me. And we would just walk. And you'd be surprised when people will follow you. And so when we got people that weren't really interested in buying a car, we used to bet how many times we could make them walk around the dealership. And so we would just walk, and they just keep following us, and we'd go around like lap 4, lap 5, and finally they'd get tired of it and go, where are we going? So they would leave. And so I'm sitting outside this meeting house, walking across the street. I decided I want to leave, and about that time somebody bangs on my window, and I look up, and there's this guy with his face like right here. He's got these big, thick glasses on, like he's staring at me through a fishbowl. And I'm like, yes. And he's like, roll your window down. And so I roll my window down. He's pushing a bicycle. And he says, can I help you with something? And I'm like, no, you can't help me with anything. And I'm across the street in the bank parking lot, and he says, well, what are you doing? And I said, well, I was looking for an AA meeting. I said, but I hadn't found it. That's okay. He said, that's where I'm going. Follow me. And I get out of the car and followed him right into my first AA meeting. So that's how I ended up in AA. Sitting across the street, deciding that no one over there could help me, not wanting to go there, calling a number that I had no idea that I was going to get on the phone, someone that I knew from 20 years before, and following some guy pushing a bicycle into my first AA meeting. And I was dumb enough after the meeting to ask the chairperson who my sponsor was, and when can I start working the steps? So they assigned me a sponsor, and right off we go. That's my introduction to Alcoholics Anonymous. And I remember going home after that first meeting, laying in my bed at night, and I'm looking at the ceiling, and I'm grinning from ear to ear, and my wife, she said, what are you so happy about? Now, mind you, this is 60 days of just pure hell, of reading self-help books, going to doctors, and I think I'm losing my mind. That feeling of pin and doom's got worse and worse, and I said, I'm an alcoholic, and she said, no shit. And I don't understand why she's so upset, because she should be as excited as I am, because I knew after that first night when they went out around the room, because they had a meeting just for me, the first step meeting, I'm important, and they described what it was like when I hit their bottom, and, I knew the first night I walked in these rooms, these people knew something about me that I didn't know about me. They knew something about me my doctors didn't know about me. They knew something about me my mother didn't know about me, and my wife didn't know about me. So it was real easy for me to stay here when I got here, because they had a solution, and it was my first sponsor was appointed to me. I didn't have an option, and I remember about a week after we finally got to know each other a little bit, he's like, man, I was trying like hell to get out that front door because I knew that chairperson was going to pick me to sponsor you. He said, you were one sick SOB. He said, I knew you was a new guy, but you didn't blink the entire hour of the meeting, and I was like, glued to the, But I got sober in a little country town in Ashland City, Tennessee, and it was a lot of really people like myself, just a bunch of old country people that just didn't play around with it. They all read big books. We had 2 book studies, a week, and that was the largest attended meeting. Now you go to a big book study, and that's probably the least attended meeting in most cities. And they didn't play with the program. It was, this is how we do it. Either do it this way or go somewhere else. We don't have time to fool with you. And that's just how I got sober. I got sober on the big book, and I got sober on the steps, and I got sober with a whole lot of prayer. I'm going to talk about some things probably differently tonight in just a moment than some of you have told me. A lot of you here have heard my story. I spoke a couple of times in Alabama, but my first sponsor, this is the way he would sponsor me. He would give me an assignment to read. And I would go home and I was supposed to read that. And then I was supposed to call him when I got done. And I was supposed to call him every day. And I can tell you folks that I made a meeting every day of the week for the first 7 years I was sober. And I called my sponsor every day for the first 7 years I was sober. That doesn't make me perfect, doesn't make me better. It just makes me willing. And I think it made me willing because I had hurt bad enough. But I had a sponsor also that I learned to love dearly. And the way he worked with me, he said, I need you to go home and you read this through this. And I said, all right. He said, call me tomorrow. I'd call him the next day. He said, what kind of day did you have? I said, man, I got to work this morning, and my boss told me to stop right there. Your boss ain't got anything to do with your sobriety. Go pray about that. Call me back. Click. So he hung up on me. So I'd leave and I'd go pray about it. And I'd call him back. And he'd say, did you pray about it? And I said, yeah. He said, now go read page 73 through 86. Call me back to me what you found. Click. Hang up the phone. So I'd call him back, and I'd say, I read page 73 through 86. He said, what did you find? I said, well, it said this is what you tried doing that. Click. And that's the way he worked with me probably my first 24 months of sobriety. He didn't want to hear about my wife. He didn't want to hear about my kids. He didn't want to hear about my job, because none of that had anything to do with me learning how not to drink a day at a time. And the first thing he made me do was first go pray about that. You go find God. And then you open up that book and you find God's instructions in that book for your life. And then get off your lazy butt and go do it. In 21 years, those directions still haven't changed for me. I can tell you this, the order of them sure get out of whack sometimes. Usually for me, it's go try to do it the way I think I should. We'll leave the prayer, reading the book part out, because that may not agree with what I want to do. But I can quickly get back to it, and that usually is caused and brought about with enough pain. Growing spiritually has been probably one of the most difficult parts of my sobriety. And I say part because sometimes I'm not willing always to grow spiritually. Sometimes I don't see something going on in my life as being spiritual. I've come to learn today that probably everything that happens in my life at least is spiritual. That I don't think anything happens in God's world by mistake. I was probably 10 years sober when I was, I just hit a spot in my sobriety where I was miserable. And everything you guys had taught me to do wasn't working anymore. It wasn't working. And I can tell you that in my first 10 years of sobriety, there's probably not a line in that big book that you can't read that I probably can't follow it up with the next 3 or 4 sentences. I did probably the worst thing you could do in AA, and that's memorize the big book. I had it memorized because I was forced to read it every day. And I thought that once I get sober, that the knowledge of the book and the amount of meetings that I attended and the number of people that I sponsored would probably have some type of detriment on how sober I actually was. Now I can tell you that this is the part where we're going to get into a little bit of, this is my experience, it doesn't have to be used. But I think that one of the things that we do in Alcoholics Anonymous is we put way too much emphasis on the chips we carry in our pockets. I think we put way too much emphasis on the time that we've been sober. Now, I can tell you that I've been sober 21 years by the grace of God, but I've met people with 35 and 40 years that I can promise you I don't want anything they have. And I've sat in meetings before, heard somebody with 6 months, I didn't know that at the time, but I'm willing to ask them to sponsor me at the end of the meeting, and then find out that they haven't been sober that long. And I've really found that it's, for me, it's a matter of not only the connection to God that I have, but my willingness to stay connected. And thank God for a sponsor that was really dependent, number one, on God, but really forced me to be dependent upon God. I listened to a speaker one time. His name was Joe Hawk, and Joe talked about the fact that, say, alcoholics don't become spiritual by choice, we become spiritual by default. And that was certainly my case. At 10 years of sobriety, I did not become spiritual and did not become closer to God by choice. It wasn't like I got up one day and said, you know what, I think I'll just start praying and meditating more. I think I'll just, become a spiritual giant. Forget all those meetings. It got to a point where the mechanical stuff wasn't working for me anymore. And I didn't know that. I thought you guys had taught me that whenever trouble came, just say the Serenity Prayer a few times and life gets better. Well, I learned the difference between a mechanical program and a spiritual program. Mechanical we can all explain. Life hits the fan. We just say the third step prayer, a couple of times, click my heels 3 times, I end up back in Kansas. And for me, it hasn't worked that way. The way it's kind of worked for me is it is a spiritual program, and that means I call somebody who I doesn't think can help me, that tells me something to do that's totally unrelated to my problem. I do that, and somehow the problem gets fixed. And for me, that's spiritual. Spiritual means I can't explain. I don't know how it works, but I've also found the spiritual part of this program. I won't say part of it because I believe it's all spiritual, but my spiritual life is really is dependent upon how much action I'm willing to put behind it. My first sponsor, I never got this until about 3 or 4 years ago. It took all those years of hearing it, but he used to say, if you think God is going to do for you what you can't do for yourself, lock yourself in a closet and see if he slides you a pork chop. Or if you think God could do for you what you can do for yourself, is what he would say. What you can do for yourself. Lock yourself in a closet and see if he slides you a pork chop. And I remember at some point in time I had that much faith, I thought, that, I just wish it, will it into my life, and then you read the books like The Secret and all this stuff out there, positive affirmations, and I just, it may work for you guys. If it does, bless me after the meeting, and I hope it'll start working for me, but it hasn't worked that way for me. Everything that's happened in my life has come with action on my part. I've had to do something. And usually whatever it is that I'm doing is totally irrelevant to the problem I'm trying to solve. I believe it was another sister that I heard one time that said, all of my problems are in the 3rd dimension and all my solutions are in the 4th dimension. And I've found that to be completely, absolutely 100% true. There's not a problem I have that's not something I can't see, touch, or feel. But I can promise you there's not a problem I can solve without going to God. It's been a journey. I had a really distorted view of God when I got sober. And it wasn't because people hadn't tried to teach me. It was growing up in a family where my parents got divorced early. My grandmother drugged me to a Methodist church. My father remarried at the age of 12. He became Catholic. So I understand the whole Catholic deal too. And my dad used to joke and say, wherever there's 4 Catholics, you'll see a 5th. So, some of you might get that. And so, but, and then from there I went to a private school in high school that was a Church of Christ, and then I learned that everybody else was going to hell. They were the only ones going to heaven. And that meant I had to go preach to my dad and my grandmother both. They thought they had it right the whole time. And so my wife and I got married. We got really confused by all of it too, so we decided we were going to go and join the Baptist church, and we became Baptist. And so I get sober, and I'm in AA, and I'm like, you guys give me the freedom to choose. So I made the choice at 2 years of sobriety. I choose nothing. I'm denouncing it all. My first sponsor told me, the only thing you didn't know about God is there is one, and you're not it. And it's funny because out of all the reading and all the studying that I do and all the prayer and meditation, I always come back to that for some reason. It's just, you're there and I'm not it. But what happened to me was during that period, I got really confused with the whole God thing. And I decided I'm denouncing Christianity. I'm throwing it all out the window. I want nothing to do with any of this stuff. And so I started reading books on Native Americanism. I started reading books on Taoism and Buddhism and getting my hands on anything I could get my hands on. And now I'm going to talk a little bit about the God of my understanding. And understand it doesn't have to be the God of your understanding, but being the God of my understanding gives me every right to talk about that. And if you don't like that, look at page 19 of your big book, because it gives me permission to do that. What it says, being in the Bible Belt, you're a little bit more free to say this, but if you go above the Mason-Dixon line, a lot of times you get chastised for being in the Bible Belt. You're a Christian because you were just born down there. Poor you poor soul. And you have to go out to California to learn that you've never really been enlightened in the South. They know everything out there, and I've met them all. But I can tell you today through my journey. One of the things that I have been willing to do since I've gotten sober, and God has blessed me with this direction in my life. He could point me in any direction, but for some reason He's given me a zeal to know Him, more than anything else. My wife likes to hear that, but I think if I can love Him, I can learn to love her, and if I love her more than I love Him, then I probably don't have things in perspective. And so after all this studying, I decided just to step back from it for a while, take a deep breath, and I went back into the history and the roots of Christianity, studied it, went and talked to a few Orthodox priests, and went and talked to some Catholic priests, and went and talked to, everybody I could talk to. Asked a whole lot of questions, just like I did when I first got sober. But now my focus is somewhere different. Now it's not how do I stay sober today, it's how do I get to know God a little bit more today. And asked a whole lot of questions to a whole lot of people, and at the end of it all, I think it was about a 2-year quest that I remember sitting just 10 years sober, miserable, suicidal, literally, not drinking, didn't want to drink, knew the drink wouldn't fix it, had no idea what to do next. I'm going to meetings, I'm sponsoring people. Life just was bad again, and that feeling of impending doom came back. I was unwilling to talk to anybody at my home group about it because I'd been sober for 10 years. I'm supposed to be the AA guru. You guys, you can't know that I'm hurting. And it took 6 months of sitting with that pain before God gave me the willingness to get off my lazy butt and drive all the way to Kentucky to a meeting where I was willing to talk about it. And I talked about it, and a couple of old-timers pulled me to the side afterwards and explained to me that they had been through the same thing, that it was time to grow. That, and it was funny because every time they would give me a suggestion, oh yeah, I know that's the part of the book that says so. And so, well, if you read it, I said, oh yeah, I know that part of it, but that's the part that said, and look at me and said, damn son, sounds like you know it, why don't you try living it? And I realized for the first time where it talks about that the sobriety is enough, I swore I wouldn't be that guy, that just not drinking would be good enough. I'm not going to be that guy. I want more than that. But at 10 years sober, that's all that had happened for me. What had happened for me is I had been 10 years without a drink, but I hadn't grown very much in any other directions or areas of my life. And so I'm sitting here miserable, and I look up and I say, I'm trying to get to know you. I've read everything. I've done everything. I don't know what to do next. And the feeling that came over me was, it was almost like, I remember looking up and just saying, God, why are you putting me through this? And I had this thought that came, call it the voice of God, call it the thought, but it was clear. It was clear enough for me to pay attention to it. And it said, because you don't know how much you can take. You don't know how much you can take. And here I was ready to give up, and God said, this is just the tip of the iceberg, buddy. You need to get ready. You get ready. So I got up and I redoubled my efforts. And what happened to me was, during that period, I remember thinking, you know what, I'm never going to be good enough. I try, I go to meetings all the time, I sponsor people, I'm doing the best I can do, and I'm just not going to be good enough, ever. Now, how can I live with myself on a daily basis knowing that now I'm not drinking, but I'm miserable? And I'm trying to do what I think is the right thing to do, but I don't feel any better. I still feel shameful, guilty, remorseful. And a word came to mind I remember seeing many times in the 12 and 12, and I had heard a lot in my life, but knew very little about. So I spent the next 6 months of my sobriety studying the word grace. And I remember coming to the conclusion that a person like me, an alcoholic like me, who tries to do everything as perfect as I can possibly do it, but always feels like on the inside that I'm just a little bit short of that goal. That for Alcoholism, I started reading books on Taoism and Buddhism and getting my hands on anything I could get my hands on. And now I'm going to talk a little bit about the God of my understanding, and understand it doesn't have to be the God of your understanding, but being the God of my understanding gives me every right to talk about that, and if you don't like that, look at page 19 of your big book, because it gives me permission to do that. What it says, being in the Bible Belt, a little bit more freely to say this, but if you go above the Mason-Dixon line, a lot of times you get chastised for being in the Bible Belt. You're a Christian because you were just born down there. Poor you poor soul. And you have to go out to California to learn that you've never really been enlightened in the South. They know everything out there, and I've met them all. But I can tell you today through my journey, one of the things that I have been willing to do since I've gotten sober, and God has blessed me with this direction in my life. He could point me in any direction, but he's for some reason He's given me a zeal to know Him, more than anything else. My wife likes to hear that, but I think if I can love Him, I can learn to love her, and if I love her more than I love Him, then I probably don't have things in perspective. And so after all this studying, I decided just to step back from it for a while, take a deep breath, and I went back into the history and the roots of Christianity, studied it, went and talked to a few Orthodox priests, and went and talked to some Catholic priests, and went and talked to everybody I could talk to. Asked a whole lot of questions, just like I did when I first got sober. But now my focus is somewhere different. Now it's not how do I stay sober today, it's how do I get to know God a little bit more today. And asked a whole lot of questions to a whole lot of people, and at the end of it all, I think it was about a 2-year quest that I remember sitting just 10 years sober, miserable, suicidal, literally, not drinking, didn't want to drink, knew the drink wouldn't fix it, had no idea what to do next. I'm going to meetings, I'm sponsoring people. Life just was bad again, and that feeling of impending doom came back. I was unwilling to talk to anybody at my home group about it because I'd been sober for 10 years. I'm supposed to be the AA guru. You guys, you can't know that I'm hurting. And it took 6 months of sitting with that pain before God gave me the willingness to get off my lazy butt and drive all the way to Kentucky to a meeting where I was willing to talk about it. And I talked about it, and a couple of old-timers pulled me to the side afterwards and explained to me that they had been through the same thing, that it was time to grow. And it was funny because every time they would give me a suggestion, oh yeah, I know that's the part of the book that says so. And so, well, if you read it, I said, oh yeah, I know that part of it, but that's the part that said, and looked at me and said, damn son, it sounds like you know it, won't you try living it? And I realized for the first time where it talks about that the sobriety is enough, I swore I wouldn't be that guy, but just not drinking would be good enough. I'm not going to be that guy. I want more than that. But at 10 years sober, that's all that had happened for me. What had happened for me is I had been 10 years without a drink, but I hadn't grown very much in any other directions or areas of my life. And so I'm sitting here miserable, and I look up and I say, I'm trying to get to know you. I've read everything. I've done everything. I don't know what to do next. And the feeling that came over me was almost like, I remember looking up and just saying, God, why are you putting me through this? And I had this thought that came, call it the voice of God, call it the thought, but it was clear. It was clear enough for me to pay attention to it. And it said, because you don't know how much you can take. You don't know how much you can take. And here I was ready to give up, and God said, this is just the tip of the iceberg, buddy. You need to get ready. You get ready. So I got up and I redoubled my efforts. And what happened to me was, during that period, I remember thinking, you know what, I'm never going to be good enough. I try, I go to meetings all the time, I sponsor people, I'm doing the best I can do, and I'm just not going to be good enough, ever. Now, how can I live with myself on a daily basis knowing that now I'm not drinking, but I'm miserable? And I'm trying to do what I think is the right thing to do, but I don't feel any better. I still feel shameful, guilty, remorseful. And a word came to mind I remember seeing many times in the 12 and 12, and I had heard a lot in my life, but knew very little about. So I spent the next 6 months of my sobriety studying the word grace. And I remember coming to the conclusion that a person like me, an alcoholic like me, who tries to do everything as perfect as I can possibly do it, but always feels like on the inside that I'm just a little bit short of that goal. That for a person like me, I need grace. And guess what, folks? Maybe you can find it, but there's not another religion in the world that offers grace other than my Christian God. So when somebody says, well, you just grew up in the Bible Belt. No, today I'm a Christian, and I know why I'm a Christian. I'm a Christian because I need grace. Some of you may be able to survive without it. That's okay. That's the God of my understanding. But I tell you that tonight because I want you to know that that's just not because of the way I was raised or that was because of the program Alcoholics Anonymous pointing me in a direction that said, young man, you need to find God. And so I found that many times people will come into the program just like I did. And what I found out at 10 years sober was AA had become my God. In the 12 and 12 it says plain and clearly, we can smile at such a Sally who calls his well-beloved AA group his higher power, for he will presently know God and call him by name. And I've seen a lot of people come into the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous, make the group their higher power, and stay there for a while. And that's cool. I have no problem with that. But if you stay there, you're missing something. I've seen people come into the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous, atheist. I don't have to believe in God. I'll use a group. I'll use whatever. Fine. But if you stay there, you're missing something. Now, I'll tell you guys something that I said in the meeting a few months ago back up in Monaco, Tennessee, where I call home now. As I had a guy openly getting mad, saying, well, I'm an atheist. I don't hear about that God crap. I said, well, that's great. I said, but the truth is I've met a lot of atheists in the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. I said, but I've not ever met one that was happy. I haven't. Now, if any of you have, that's your experience. Praise God. But I've never met one that didn't sit in the meeting with a straight poker face, and all they wanted to do was beat everybody in the room to death with their big book knowledge and tell everybody how they could get sober and stay sober without God in their lives. That's great, but that's not what my big book tells me. And if I'm going to stay sober in Alcoholics Anonymous, my job as an active participant of the program of AA is to carry the message contained in the first 164 pages of that book, which is our basic text. And if I can't do that, then I am missing something. And so I would try another way, but I've tried it almost every other way. I've tried to stay sober without God. I've tried to stay sober leaning on people in the program. I've tried to stay sober placing my dependence upon my sponsor. My first sponsor, I loved that man probably more than I loved my own father, and that's not a lie. I was closer to him, definitely. I can tell you that at 14 years sober, my sponsor told me from the day I got sober, son, you need to be really careful because there are a lot of things out there just as cunning and baffling and powerful as alcohol. And every morning you get up, you look yourself in the mirror and ask yourself, which character defect are you willing to die for today? I don't have to drink to die from my character defects. He said, that next time you shoot that bird in traffic, he said, that might be the guy to follow you down to the gas station and blow your brains out. You think because you got away with it today, God's going to let you get away with it every day. That first sponsor was a man that they found shot dead in the head in his kitchen floor as a result of an inappropriate relationship he was having with somebody else who was 14 years sober. I get a phone call stepping out of the doctor's office, my sponsor's dead, been shot, killed. And that I get to learn from. I get to learn to see what happens. He had lost everything through a series of really unfortunate events. In the last couple of years, I watched him gradually stay away from meetings, not talk to anyone in the program, be less and less accountable to anyone else, and really start talking derogatory about the relationship with his God. And ultimately, I watched him just like a plant being stuck in a closet. I watched him wither away and die. I know what happens firsthand. The things that I'm talking about tonight are not things that I've read in the book. They're not things that I've heard in a meeting, although some of them I probably have bled off on me, but they're things that I've actually seen happen. It's my experience. And I can tell you that the program of Alcoholics Anonymous has certainly been a big part of saving my life when I got sober. But Bill Wilson said himself that AA is spiritual kindergarten. This is a great place for us to start. When the Oxford group was fired up and they were trying to help everybody in the world, not only get sober, but fix their marital problems and whatever sins they had in their life, they couldn't help the drunk because they couldn't stay sober. They'd come in the meeting, sit on the back row drunk, throwing paper wads and acting like a bunch of idiots. And, they knew if we could just keep them sober a day, maybe they could hear something, they'd get a little bit of help. Bill Wilson decided, hey, we need to start something to get these guys sober so they can at least hear. So they got sober so they could hear. And so I didn't get sober just not to drink. I got sober so I could hear. Hear the power of God. See the power of God. Hear God work in my life. That's a difficult thing to do. I heard someone earlier talking about sitting and listening to God. I was probably about 7 or 8 years sober, and I went on a spiritual retreat that was a silent retreat. Now, being a former car salesman, that's kind of like putting a woodpecker on Noah's Ark. That's against my nature, and I can tell you, this was a 3-day event, but just the first 24 hours was the silent part of it. And I was so happy to see 24 hours in 1 minute. So I made it. It was tough. God made me a talker. But what's funny about that is you fast forward 14 years, and today I'm probably more silent than I've ever been, and I appreciate the silence more than I ever have. And that has become an important part of my life, to be quiet, to really be quiet. My wife and I attend a meeting on Tuesday afternoons at St. Mary's up in Swanee, where it's just a contemplative prayer. Few people get together and we sit and try to do what we call a 30-minute sit. And we sit for 30 minutes in complete silence. And it's been an important part of my life to become a part of that group. And though we don't attend as much as we used to, I still try to incorporate what I've learned there into my daily life. The bad thing about it, when it comes to prayer and meditation, that is something that I prayed a lot when I got sober, and prayed a lot all the way up through the years of my sobriety. Meditation, sitting and listening, was not something that I did a whole lot. And I've really started trying to practice that probably the last 5, 6 years of my life. And I remember calling a fellow out in Texas that I respected his sobriety and asked him about meditation. How do you meditate? Because he gave me a really good talk on meditation. And he said, and this answer was, when you tried it for a year, call me back. Click. And I thought, hey, cool, that's like my first sponsor. He didn't listen, he just hung it. And why didn't you give me such a short answer? So I started trying it. I started doing meditation every day. And I went about probably 2 weeks. And guess what? Life got better. It really got better. And even on the inside, I was a whole lot better. So things are really good. Guess what we do now? Well, I don't have to do this anymore. I can stop. So I called this guy back, he's like, he said, do it for a year solid and call me back. Don't miss a day. And so I'm like, well, okay, I'll do this. So I do it for 3 weeks. In 3 weeks, things get better. I feel better. Life is better. So I don't have to do it anymore. I can stop, And that's been the hardest thing for me for meditation. It's not that it doesn't work and I see no benefit. It works so well that I just stop doing it. And the ability and the willingness to pick it back up becomes harder and harder because I don't see the necessity in it. And it's sad that as long as I've been sober, I still have to see a necessity in something to want to do it. That shouldn't have to be that way, but unfortunately, evidently, God gave me a lazy streak, and He uses that against me sometimes. I know that motivation for me has been greatly induced by pain. I know the 12 and 12 says that great suffering and great love are AA's disciplinarians. We need no others. And a lot of people in AA don't like to hear that. But if you think about those words, great suffering and great love are AA's disciplinarians. We need no others. They don't give us any options. They said there's 2. You can either do it God's way or you can suffer. And if you don't believe that, go back further in the book and it says we have to allow God to discipline us, where we just outlined in this book, which means my God does discipline me. I didn't like discipline when I was a child, but I don't believe that my God doesn't discipline me today, but I also know He disciplines me out of love. It's different from being whipped and being chastised. My God does for me today from what He does for me when it comes to punishment, because He loves me. He doesn't want to see me get hurt worse already than I'm hurting myself. So He'll bump me around and kick me around a bit to get me back center. And I can either willfully participate, or I can go about my merry way and try it my way again, and I'll get bumped and kicked back till I get back center again. And sobriety has just been that way for me. It's just been a series of learning events. I really believe that today my core belief is that everything that happens to me today and every opportunity I have to draw a breath is a learning experience. My God is talking to me 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and every person, place, thing, or situation that's placed in my life is there for me to learn something. It's there for my soul to be cleansed just a little bit more. And I choose to go and get up some days and pick and choose where God can teach me and who He can teach me from. And I miss it, But don't worry, if you miss the lesson, it will be retaught. Over and over and over and over again. And it never fails when I have no patience. I get stuck in traffic every day for a week, Not just a day. But I'll wrap it up by saying this, one thing that I've learned that I hated when I got here was that the phrase keep coming back. I don't believe meet and makers make it. I believe step takers make it. But I can tell you that there was a time in my sobriety where going to meetings and sponsoring people and working the steps and reading the book and praying in the morning and praying at night wasn't enough. It just wasn't enough. But the one thing that I did was not drink, and I kept coming back. I kept coming back, and I'm glad that God gave me the ability to do that. I've seen so many people walk out of these rooms and never make it back in. And I don't know why He sees fit to keep me around, but He does, and He continues to teach me in both positive and negative ways. It's always positive, my viewpoint, in God's Word, but my viewpoint sometimes isn't always that of it. I think I tend to judge what's good for me and bad for me, whether it's pleasant or unpleasant. And that's not always the case. Mickey Farmer, a buddy of mine in the program, he's passed away now, used to say, one thing that really ticks me off, he says, how come is it everything that's going really good in my life, God gets all the credit, and everything's screwing up in my life, you blame it all on me. He said, I think He ought to get some credit for it too. And I used to laugh about that, but I almost kind of agree with Mickey today. Either God is or He isn't. What's your choice to be? If God is everything and I'm nothing, God has all power and I have none, I have to believe He's in it all. He's Mickey, the same guy. Mickey used to say it takes every one of us to make the world go around. And I'm just glad today that my God, when you follow the dictates of a higher power, the God of my understanding today has me playing the role of the sober drunk. And I, with that viewpoint, I can truly say I am grateful to be sober today, because my God does not have me playing that role today. But I know, as sure as I'm standing here, He could have me playing it tomorrow. And because I don't know what role He has me to play, I want to stay real close to Him, and I want to try to do my part. I don't know if I can earn my way into staying sober, but I sure want to stay close to my God. I know that. I'll wrap it up by saying there was a story I heard a couple of months back I'd like to share with you guys. It's really short. There was a group of gold prospectors that went out into the mountains, and they had went looking for gold and didn't do well. About 10 of them. They come back, about halfway back on their journey into town, they stop to make camp, and they get attacked by a group of men, and they kill about half of them. And the other 5 left their horses, and they ran into the woods. Had a couple of guns, and all they had was a couple of shovels, and they're hiding out in the woods, and the old bandits left these guys out there. And they're starving, they have nothing to drink, and one of them finds his way down to this old creek and gets down there, and they start drinking some water, and he sees a few specks in the water. Starts digging, and they find a huge amount of gold down there. So they realize it's such a huge find that they need to get some more tools, and they need to go ahead and start digging this stuff up. They're going to be rich, and they don't have to do anything the rest of their lives. And they go into town, and the 3, 4 of them make a solemn promise not to say anything to anyone in town. And they go into town, and they buy the tools they need to mine the rest of this gold out, and they buy a couple of horses, what little gold they found. They start heading out of town, and as they're walking, the leader looks back, and there's about 150 people following them. And he looks at his men, he says, which one of you guys said something? And no one spoke up. He said, I know one of you said something to somebody. I told you not to say anything to anybody. Look, they're all following us now. We have to split it with everybody. And they all said, we didn't tell anyone. I promise you, we didn't say anything. And so they go about a couple more miles, and he turns around and he goes back to the man that's leading this group behind him. And he says, hey, no hard feelings, but I just want you to tell me which one of my men told you what we found out here. And the guy said, nobody told me anything. He said, I can just tell you, fella, he said, we saw it in your eyes when you walked into town. You know, Alcoholics Anonymous is a place that I hope that when a newcomer walks in the door, they see it in our eyes, folks. Just like Bill Wilson saw it with Ebby sitting across the table from him. He said he had that starry-eyed look about him. You know, something wasn't right. He was different. You know, I hope that when the newcomer walks in, rather than sitting around and fighting over what kind of coffee we're going to buy for the month, or, you know, everything the groups fight about, and, you know, that they hear recovery, and they hear a message of a loving and caring God. It's taken me a long 24 hours to, you know, to stick around here, and I thank God for the old-timers that were here before me. I thank God for the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous that Bill Wilson left behind for us to give me the instructions to follow when I don't know what to do. And events like this where people can get together and bounce ideas off one another and not only grow closer to one another, but go closer to the God of their understanding. Today I have a loving and caring God. I didn't have that when I got here.